A woman who drowned her two sons in a bathtub and then tucked their bodies into bed for their father to later find them has been found guilty of murder. It is a case that has rocked the community of East London, and you're going to be shocked to hear what police say she was doing instead of taking care of her 2-year-old and 5-year-old. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Out in the UK, you may think it's just an open and shut case when it comes to sentencing for a woman who killed her 2 young children, but not quite. You see, a judge wants to see some psychiatric reports first before she's officially sentenced, and the Kingston Crown Court has currently scheduled Cara Alexander to be sentenced in April, and our understanding is she faces life in prison, so it's not clear if those reports will affect that or not, but there is a lot of circumstances going on here that we want to talk about. So, according to UK authorities, this 47-year-old mom from London drowned 2 of her young children, just 2 and 5 years old, and then proceeded to tuck them into their bunk beds like essentially nothing happened. Pretty disturbing, to say the least, and I'm going to delve into what might have led up to this horrific decision with an expert. We're going to bring her on in just a bit, but first, I want to tell you what happened that night in December of 2022. So Alexander and her longtime boyfriend, Selvin Thomas, the father of the kids, had split up just a few months before, and she had moved with the children to a place called Dagenham. It's in East London. Now, Thomas was the father of 2-year-old Elijah, also known as Teddy, and 5-year-old Marley. He told police he was supposed to have the boys that weekend, but he hadn't heard from Alexander. So he goes to the home, but said that Alexander told him that the boys were sleeping, and then she proceeded to slam the door in his face. Now, the prosecutor in this case, Philip Evans, told the jury that Thomas demanded she open the door, so she let him in. He found a bunch of toys up against the door, almost as if it was trying to barricade the door in. And then he rushes to Elijah and Marley's room and found these little boys in their pajamas, in their shared bunk bed, both on the bottom bunk, and both dead. He told police that he ran out of the room screaming, "Cara, what the F? You've killed my children." Now, Alexander was gone, though. She wasn't there. She was arrested, though. She was picked up by authorities an hour later, according to reporting from the Daily Mail. She told investigators that she had left Marley and Elijah in the bathtub alone so she could go smoke cannabis and that she'd simply fallen asleep. Now, the heartbreaking phone call that Thomas made to 99, that's the UK version of 911, that was played for the jury. Now, we don't have a copy of it, but it was reported by the Daily Mail about what he said in the call. And apparently he said, "She killed my children. I've come here to check on them. She slammed the door in my face. I said, you need to open the door or I'll call the police, so she let me in. I said, where are the children? She said they're in bed. So I've gone to check on my children. She's run across. Now she's running to a neighbor's house, jumped the fence. My children are dead. They're dead. They're both in the bottom bunk, freezing cold. She's lost her mind, and I don't know what she's done. She's killed both my little boys." Now, the prosecutor said that Alexander had run away through neighboring backyards, but she was caught. She was detained. She told police that she left the boys unattended, but she denied intending to ever hurting them. Now, a post-mortem examination found that the boys died from a lack of oxygen, so the reporting to the court that this was either a drowning or they were smothered. And as the prosecutor put it, they died from, quote, an interference with the normal mechanics of breathing. Paramedics, they rushed to the scene. There was really nothing they could do, though, telling police that the boys had been dead for several hours. According to the Daily Mail, Prosecutor Evans told the court they were bunched up together and it looked like they were asleep. They had the duvet up to their shoulders, only their faces were visible. Thomas touched Marley's face on his right cheek and he was freezing cold and hard. He knew immediately that they were dead and thought that they had been dead for some time. Now, the Sun reports that Alexander admitted to 2 charges of gross negligence manslaughter by breaching the duty of care, but it turns out the prosecution, based on this reporting, wasn't going to accept that. They didn't accept that plea, and they charged her with 2 counts of murder. Alexander's lawyer had argued at trial that diminished responsibility should be open to her due to acute and transient psychotic disorder, meaning a brief psychotic episode. But according to the Telegraph, after just about 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Miss Alexander guilty on 2 counts of murder. Sir Joel Benathan, Justice of the High Court, decided that he wouldn't impose Alexander's sentence that day, announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am not going to pass sentence today. I want to have up-to-date psychiatric reports, and I want the wider family to have a chance to make statements." Just a crazy story, to say the least. And look, the stories we cover on Sidebar, I feel, highlight how scary the world can be at times, and how important it is to protect yourself when you think about that. And by the way, talking about that is particularly true online, especially when it comes to protecting your personal information. I mean, whether it's spam, identity theft, online stalking, our amazing sponsor, Surfshark, offers an incredible solution to these issues with their alternative number feature. So this service, built right into the Surfshark app, lets you create an entirely new identity. It's complete with a random US phone number, email, name. This way you can keep your real number and details completely private. It is great for signing up for services or websites that maybe you don't fully trust, and it ensures that your personal phone number stays free from spam. Also, with alternative number, you don't have to give your real phone number to strangers anymore while shopping on various marketplaces. So if you're ready to take your online privacy to that next level, check out Surfshark in the description below or visit surfshark.com/alt-sidebar. Sign up now, get Surfshark's alternative number feature plus 4 extra months of Surfshark. So I want to talk about this more, but specifically I want to focus on Alexander's apparent drug use and how that might have played a role in what happened here. And to do that, I want to bring in Bethany Pridgen, a forensic chemist, to talk more about this. Bethany, thanks so much for coming on. First, before we get into the science of it all, just your reaction to this story, because it's a difficult one, to say the least.
Oh yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's it's tragic. It's I'm a parent as well as a chemist, toxicologist. So there is that personal element and then the scientific element that kind of combines, and it is shocking, but it's also such a tragic incident. But unfortunately, we do see these situations happen, and a lot of times with mothers after having children and having postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, maybe already having mental health issues, and it's just really sad to see something like this happen because it's tragic for everyone involved, and it's it kind of breaks your heart.
Yeah, and some reports have called Alexander a, quote, a cannabis addict, and said that she had recently been in touch with at least 2 dealers in December of 2022. When you think about that, talk to me about the effects of cannabis and how that could have affected decision-making here.
Yeah, so I think you have to go back not just to the how cannabis affected it now, but again, when people are dealing with mental health issues, alcohol and cannabis are the 2 primary drugs that people go to sometimes to help deal with the symptoms: depression, anxiety, maybe psychosis, paranoia. So they're kind of trying to treat maybe possible other issues they have. And then cannabis, while it has so many medical benefits, there's also some negatives. When someone's already dealing with mental health issues or other medical issues that it may not assist, it can actually exacerbate psychoses in people or psychiatric issues. It's really unfortunate because we often think of cannabis as kind of being a happier drug. People are silly, laughing, relaxed, but it can also, when you're using it frequently, it can cause you to be more lethargic. It impairs your sense of time and orientation, and it can also increase those paranoias. And frequent users can form dependent over time. So it's a minority of users that can develop an addiction or a dependence, but about 30% of frequent heavy cannabis users can develop an addiction.
Does it matter also the potency and the strain?
Oh, absolutely. And we're seeing, much more potent marijuana than we've ever seen, these days because the industry has been legalized in so many areas. So the marijuana that people and cannabis that people used, 10, 20 years ago was much less potent than what's available today. When you have an increased potency, you're going to also have an increased introduction to the system, and that is going to increase the side effects. So if you're already dealing with maybe paranoia, some psychoses, anxiety, it could increase. It may be too much for your system, and so it could increase those negative behaviors and cause someone who may typically have not been, as affected at a lower potency to now exhibit behaviors that you would see in someone that's consumed a lot more of the drug.
Forgive me if we're repetitive, but is there a long-term effect of continued habitual use in terms of decision-making or thinking? You were very clear about how it could exacerbate psychotic episodes or an underlying mental health condition, but assuming someone doesn't have that, what could be some long-term effects of cannabis use?
Right. So we're seeing a lot of what's called cannabis use disorder. So that tends to occur in people who, again, are frequent heavy users of cannabis. And those long-term effects are going to be more of a permanence of some of those side effects that we would see on a temporary level with cannabis use. The chemicals will change how your mind responds to that drug and other drugs, but also other chemicals in your body. So the ones that control your mental health stability. And so over a long period of time, when you're creating these adjustments on a daily or multi-time day basis, it can cause permanent changes to how your brain works overall.
That's frightening to be thinking about. Have you seen cases like this before, where young parents, are smoking cannabis and they make deadly decisions?
I mean, this is, to me, the cannabis kind of connection, that's been brought forward is more rare. You're typically seeing either untreated conditions. Alcohol tends to create more violent outcomes. Cannabis is not typically known for a violent outcome. So it is rare to see something like this. But again, it also creates this altered sense, especially in someone who's using it heavily and frequently. It can create an altered sense of reality.
Right. And to be clear, I can't definitively say that she had smoked that before killing these children, but it seems that she was smoking it at one point, and it might have contributed, whether, losing sense of time and space and what was happening, or, as you mentioned, the long-term effects. I will tell you, the Sun has reported that both of these boys, Marley and Elijah, had traces of cannabis in their systems. And the prosecutor reportedly said that that could have happened if they were in this enclosed environment where cannabis was being smoked. What do you make of that?
Well, there is the ability to have like a secondhand ingestion of cannabis smoke. If the children are living in a home where cannabis is being smoked on a regular basis, then, absolutely, you could expect to find trace levels, especially if they're getting exposed a lot. So it's a similarity to secondhand smoke. If it's in the room, it's not going to be limited to the person that's just inhaling it. Other people are going to be able to also inhale and ingest at lower levels. But when you're a child, you're much smaller than an adult. So eventually you are going to have that exposure. And cannabis can be detected for weeks or even months after ingestion. So this could have been there because of a long-term exposure as well.
What is the effect it has on such young children?
I mean, there are reports of people who have, the same effects that you would have of smoking marijuana without actually smoking the joint or the pipe yourself, having those same effects. I've heard anecdotes from relatives in the past where I don't want to smoke, but I'll have them inhale and then blow it in my mouth, which is crazy to me. But they also get that high. So there is the potential to have the same effects when you're exposed. And again, if you're in a small space, you're more likely to breathe in what's there and what's being burned and exhaled. So I would imagine you could have some of the same effects that any typical marijuana smoker would have.
When we're talking about the psychiatric reports that the court is going to evaluate, one of the things that I'm wondering now after talking to you about this is whether or not it can be determined the use of cannabis didn't exacerbate whatever psychotic condition she might have had, but help to alleviate it in some way, which I think would hurt her case, would hurt her in some way, if this was now a result of a conscious decision. Is that something that would appear in a psychiatric report? Am I totally off base about that might be a consideration, something we should be on the lookout for?
I mean, I'm not sure exactly how psychiatrists will delve into it, but I think that it's always important in any of these cases that you look at all the contributors to any potential health issue or psychiatric issue, is also what could either aid or harm the person's ability to manage that mental health condition. So I would hope that they would at least take into account the drug use. And again, cannabis isn't really known for violent responses, but it can make you where you're not as concerned, loss of time, lethargy, impaired judgment. When I read things like the person may have, consumed cannabis and left them in the bathtub, I mean, that is a reasonable assumption. I know she was found guilty of drowning them, but it's reasonable to believe that they were left and she just forgot, which would be really tragic as well, to have just lost sense of time,
Well, it was the postmortem analysis that determined that this was a smothering or a drowning, and it wasn't just, they were just left to be. So that's why it was upgraded to murder. But look, I will say this much. After the guilty verdict, Samantha Yelland, a senior Crown prosecutor in the London Homicide Unit, told the media this, and I think this is an important way to kind of end the conversation. Our thoughts remain with Elijah and Marley's family and friends who have been completely devastated by their loss. It is unimaginable to think what those poor children went through in their final moments. It is a parent's job to keep their children safe, and Kara Alexander not only failed to do that, but robbed them of their lives. Bethany Pridgen, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time. Difficult case, but I'm glad you set us straight about what we should be thinking about in terms of this drug use and a potential factor it might have played in all this.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.